Luke Allison from CriticalBench.com, and I'm here with John Buckley. John, how are you?
I'm good, Luke. How are you doing?
Doing all right. Been trying to chase you down. Got your name originally from Jason Dolby, and just kind of wanted to hear a little bit about your background with kettlebells and training people, and give the listeners a little bit of idea who you are and what you do.
Sure. Well, I was born in New York, lived there most of my life, and I started training in New York in about 2001. Before that, I was a football player and just kind of a weightlifter. And then in 2003, I started training with kettlebells. I moved out to Oakland, and it became kind of my full-time thing. I've slowly been transitioning out of personal training and into just straight kettlebell coaching and strength coaching. And now I pretty much just run the Orange Kettlebell Club and travel around with Dolby and Steve Cotter and Ken Blackburn and stuff, and teach kettlebell all around the world, which is super fun.
And I'm sure that that's going to make people very jealous, to begin with. That sounds kind of like a dream come true. Is that kind of how it happened for you, what you wanted to do?
Well, I guess so. I mean, after I took my first kettlebell workshop, I remember I was a trainer. I was doing my 20 sessions a week or 25 sessions a week and just getting by. And then, it was actually Jason Brown who came in, Jason C. Brown, and he did one of his kettlebell athletics workshops, and it was great, a lot of fun. And I looked at him and thought, this guy's really got it together. This is what I want to do, And then I just started trying to learn as much as I possibly could, and I realized that there's, kind of almost an infinite amount of things you can learn about lifting a kettlebell, which kind of shocked me, to be honest with you, because it seems like such a basic tool. But I began to model myself after that, and the more people I met and the more workshops and certifications I went to, the more confidence I started to build. And a little over a year ago, I just decided to bite the bullet, and I just quit my job at the big gym and put all my eggs in the big kettlebell basket. So I guess it's kind of like a dream. It certainly feels like a lot of work, but it is nice to enjoy what I do. That's true.
Now, you sort of mentioned some things that I think most people are going to be familiar with in terms of kettlebell. It seems simplistic. It seems it couldn't possibly be as complicated as it is, but yet it's really effective. Maybe what drew you to that and then convinced you that was what you wanted to do? Well,
I was really bored. I had been bodybuilding for a while and doing some kind of rudimentary powerlifting, and after 10 years of just lifting weights and hanging out in the gym, I was bored, and my body showed it. My physique showed it. My strength showed it. My health definitely showed it. And my friend introduced me, my friend Gavin Van Black from New York, he just kind of introduced me to kettlebells one day because they were dropped off at our gym. And as soon as I started playing around with them, I realized, okay, this is fun. This is something that, you don't just get stronger at, but you can actually get better at. Your clean can be better, your swing can be better, your snatch can be better. So it's something that I can practice and not just train at. With the bench press, for me, it was always, how much can you bench? And I would do it until I got some kind of shoulder impingement or, minor tear in my pec or something, and then I'd have to stop, kind of get real heavy, and then start again and I healed up, But with kettlebell, I wasn't getting injured. I found it very interesting as far as all the different things you could do, and then once I started to learn a little bit more about the technical aspects of kind of the 3 core list, and I just really fell in love with that, So, it totally saved me, I guess, from the boring death of a weightlifter.
Well, I think sort of your story about bench pressing, I think, is probably something most people can relate to on Critical Bench. The idea of this really big bench in this North American sort of cultural thing, but say something a little bit about, the kettlebell. A lot of people think of it as, I can do swings with it, and maybe it can help, like with general physical preparedness, but it actually is its own sort of, competition and style of training in and of itself, isn't it?
Sure. I mean, it's all of those things, really. There's definitely a sport for kettlebell lifting, and the main concept that I try to get across with kettlebell lifting in general is that it's really an endurance sport. It's an endurance tool. It's not a strength tool. A lot of people pick up a kettlebell, say like a 32 kilo, or even say a 48 kilo. Okay, and that's the beast, the big nasty kettlebell, and their reaction is, this is really heavy. And my reaction to that is, really, it's 110 pounds. What do you bench? Like, what do you squat? If we're talking heavy, right? So when you look at a tool that's in competition at most 70 pounds or so, to me, that's an endurance tool. So, in what you were saying before about comparing to something like a bench press, a bench press is how much can you bench, right? And a kettlebell is how many times can you lift this kettlebell, right? And that concept came out of the idea that, kettlebell lifting really is something that came out of poverty. You didn't have a whole gym full of equipment. You didn't have the option to go up in weight. You just didn't have it. You had one kettlebell. Your little village had one kettlebell, and guys like me and, I don't know, I haven't met you, so we'll just say Dolby, right, would be sitting around challenging each other saying, well, I can lift that more times than you. And as far as the pressing goes, from what I've been taught over in Russia, there is no bench press. There's just press. There's just put it over your head. There's no side press or bent press or anything like that. It's just press, So it kind of, it's definitely an attitude shift, when you start working with kettlebells, for sure.
Now, you mentioned that you've been able to travel around. Sort of, where are some of the interesting places that you've gone, places that respond really well, that sort of, people might not associate with sort of an interest in physical culture?
Well, I just got back from Japan, and Japan is a really interesting place because I've never associated it with any kind of physical culture. And when I was talking about going over there, the people that I was talking to were basically telling me that, it's definitely not a physically, it's not an industry over there that we can work with, And when I went over there, I couldn't really tell you if that's true or not, because the people that I was working with were incredibly enthusiastic and really excellent students and completely obsessed with getting better at what I was teaching. So I went there last year, and I give kind of a seminar along with my friend Ken Black, and basically everything that we work on, these guys have built up over the last year. And when I went back there, I was really amazed at how well they learned everything that we taught them, including the things that we've changed. Because I've evolved as a lifter, and I'm watching them lift, and I'm thinking, holy cow, they're lifting just like I did last year, which is incredible, right? And the kettlebell culture over there is kind of like a huge underground cult, It's crazy. But really fun to work with, for sure.
And it sounds like you're basically finding like-minded people wherever you go that have this interest in the implement, sort of as drives them, and then the different sort of skills and facets that they develop in working at it.
Oh yeah, I mean the kettlebell has kind of turned into this idol. People worship it. It's weird to me. I always think of kettlebells, and I tell people, you might love your kettlebell, but your kettlebell hates you. Believe me, it's not looking out for you. If you're not careful and you don't watch what you're doing, that kettlebell's going to hurt you really, badly. But yeah, people just completely, they seem to really love being associated with the kettlebell. I know I do. If you came over to my place there are kettlebells everywhere. It's kind of embarrassing, really, but it's like, all my shirts have kettlebells on them, and, I see people with tattoos and earrings and all this crazy stuff, and, yeah, I guess it's kind of like a gang, If you throw, you're in. So it's really nice. I know my clients, the people that I still do train, when they walk into the gym, they have this kind of aura about them of just, unbreakable confidence, for sure.
And that seems like a different sort of mentality, as opposed to someone that's interested in going to the gym and doing sort of cardio like a gerbil or something like that, where they really do want different things. They want the confidence, and they want sort of longer range fitness with better sort of attributes being developed. Is that
sure?
Yeah, that seems like a movement away from the sort of corporate Globo gym type thing that we see everywhere.
Definitely. I mean, it's basically going at it from the other direction. When I was younger, I grew up really heavy, and I started bodybuilding because I wanted to feel good about myself, and I wanted to look good, and I would read all the magazines and look at all the pictures and think, that's what a man looks like, right? And as I grew older, I was a lit major in college, right? So I started reading a lot about Greek mythology and, under the gun, actually. But I really got a lot out of it. But the thing that applies most to weight training is a lot of people took on the aesthetic pursuit of bodybuilding. You look at an athlete, you look at a sculpture of an athlete, and you think, okay, that's what a man is. I want to look like that. Okay? But really, that guy looked like that because he was a great athlete, and he just happened to look like that. Okay? So really, people kind of went after the aesthetic and didn't really go after the athleticism. Kettlebell, really addresses the athleticism, so we're not dealing so much with hypertrophy and symmetry as we are focusing in performance. And as a result, you end up very, very strong with really good endurance and excellent joint mobility and tendon and ligament strength and everything, and great grip, and incredible confidence. It's really much more fun for me personally to be super strong than it was ever to have, 22-inch biceps. And by the way, I'm really huge, so they didn't look like monster on me. They were just kind of proportionate.
Sure, fair enough. It seems, as you mentioned, this idea of sort of the obsession with aesthetics, that if people would sort of step back and reassess and do something to train for performance, that in a way the aesthetic dimensions would take care of themselves if they were strong enough or they were capable enough, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the people that I train, a lot of my students are women, and actually the spectrum is really wide. They're very young, and I'm still not going to say very old, but you get the idea, okay? And in my experience, starting as a trainer, a lot of people don't want to be big. Women especially, they always say, I don't want to get too big, But nobody ever complains about being really strong, and kettlebell will make you incredibly strong, much stronger than you think you could be, without making you very big. I'm certainly not as muscular as I used to be, but I'm way stronger than I ever was at my mass peaks, for sure.
Just go into that for a second, just in case people aren't as familiar with maybe why that's not adding size. Is it because you're working on sort of anaerobic or power endurance? What's the sort of the capability that you're developing that's going to keep you from getting really big, actually?
Well, there's several elements there. The first one is obvious. Okay, you're using the same weight and you're doing hundreds, if not thousands, of reps in a workout. Okay, so anyone who does any kind of bodybuilding knows if you got a weight that you can move 1,000 times, you're not going to get big doing it. You're just not. Okay. Another element is that the kettlebell really deals with the sequence of force. Okay, so we want to teach your body to generate force sequentially so that you move much more like a whip, right? If you see if you see a professional baseball player swing a bat, you can see his body building up force one on top of the next. You can actually see it generate through his legs, through his hips, and his upper body whips around. Whereas if you see somebody who's very unathletic swing a bat, it's basically just their arms, hulking at the bat, right? Hulking at the ball, rather. Okay. So the kettlebell really teaches the body how to work in sequence with which transfers immediately to any kind of sports application that you can think of. Another aspect of it, the one that is probably its best selling point, I guess, is it teaches your body to use large muscle groups to accomplish large goals, right? And what I mean by that is, somebody might look at a picture of a kettlebell swing, for example, and think, okay, that's a shoulder exercise, right? Or they'll look at a kettlebell clean and say, okay, that's a bicep exercise, that's a curl, right? But really what we're doing is we're teaching you to use your hips and your thighs and your calves and your toes and your back and your chest to move that whole kettlebell. Not just your arm, actually hardly ever your arm at all. Most of the list, the idea is to get the arm out of it. But we teach you to use your whole body. We teach you to use your inertia. We teach you to maintain your equilibrium as you're driving a significant force away from you. And the result of that is, the load gets very light. It turns away from being a 70-pound curl into a 70-pound deadlift. One sounds very heavy, one sounds very light, right? So, that's the basics behind why a kettlebell won't bulk you up if you don't want it to.
And I guess indirectly, that's sort of a surreptitious way to address maybe muscular imbalances that people are having, that they're not aware of by forcing them to, cause their muscles to fire in a certain sequence to perform the movement. Otherwise, they just wouldn't be able to perform it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the first one that you'll see is the way people change the way they say get out of a chair. Most people who are just kind of, I guess muggles, that's what we call them around here, right? They use their knee as their major fulcrum when they're standing up, right? Anybody who's athletic would use their hip as their main fulcrum, okay? The kettlebell, the first thing it does is it changes you from a knee-dominated person to a hip-dominated person, and it's immediately going to relieve stress on your knees, almost instantly. And that is super easy to teach, In addition to that, it really teaches you to use your lower body to support your upper body so that your spinal erectors aren't working in some kind of crazy way that gives you back pain all the time. I have at least one client who has 2 fused discs in his lumbar spine, and, he spent years not being able to do anything. He was very scared to do anything, and once we started working with kettlebells, as you can imagine, he was terrified, scary moment. But now he's got no problems. He works with the 24 kilos, and, he swings those one arm at a time, cleans them, snatch, no sweat, no pain, no problem.
So very accessible even for, special populations and people with injury concerns and things like that.
I mean, they say that, the kettlebell sport is the sport you take up when you're too injured or too old to play other sports. Like it's
replacing tennis and golf, it sounds like.
Well, I mean, you can't play tennis if you're injured. If you have a torn ACL or a torn MCL, you're not playing tennis, right?
This is true.
But kettlebell sport, and this is the sport specifically. So when I say kettlebell sport, I mean the jerk, the snatch, and the clean and jerk. Okay.
Sure.
These 3 movements, okay, are movements that you can use to train your cardiovascular health and your muscular endurance and your power endurance, okay? You don't really move your feet around too much in any of these movements, and your knees never go past about 35 degrees of flexion. You're staying in what we call a high position, okay? So, there's no impact, and there's no excessive bending of the knee, okay? And your hip is your major fulcrum. So if you have an athlete who's had some kind of knee injury, right? Like I train a amateur hockey player, okay, and he blew out his knee playing hockey. As soon as he could walk, we had him back on the bells because, he put his brace on, and really, he's very good at the belt, so he didn't need the brace, but emotionally, he needed the brace, right? And we have him back doing, huge sets of kettlebell snatches just to keep his endurance up, because his options are, the hand bike or, the kettlebell, right? So we can get his heart rate, way, way up just using the kettlebell doing snatches. And, he's still under load, so he's not losing any actual strength. And when he gets back to practicing for his sport, he might not be right on top of his game because he won't be, used to playing because he'd been out so long. But at the same time, he'll still be in much better condition than he would have been had he not been able to train at all.
Now, it sounds like this area of, sort of applied, what would you say, sort of rehabilitation or, sort of acute corrective exercise is something that has very serious potential, for the ability to be scaled up. Does that interest you? Is that a sort of area that you would like to work in?
Well, I play around with it with some of my clients. The guy who actually owns the Breakaway Performance Center, where I do a lot of work in San Francisco, he and I have been working on a protocol with the New Leaf system. I don't know if you're familiar with the New Leaf, but it's
no. Go into that for a second.
Oh, geez, it's so his specialty. But
oh wow!
Basically, it's like it's the kind of thing that you would use to find your optimal heart rate zones. So if you're training for a triathlon, you would know how to expand your heart rate zones, right? And if you're training to lose weight, they have like your optimal heart rate zone. And we've been working on a protocol with the kettlebell to use it as a test rather than the bike or the treadmill, because it's really, the way we have it set up at the gym, it's designed very much for triathletes. I'm interested in changing it over, expanding it to kettlebell athletes.
Is that similar to, the concept of VO2 max?
Yeah. It's very much like that. Actually, I guess that's exactly what it is. But certainly not my specialty. He's definitely the endurance guy.
Yeah, I think people tend to sort of break into groups based on their interest and personality. So
sure, perfectly. It's definitely it's just not my style to overreach my bounds. Like I know what I do really well, and I stick to that. And if I have an idea, like I did with this New Leaf thing, Joel's the first guy I go to. I say, all right, man, we got a project we're working on together, meaning you're going to do this, and I'm going to tell you what I want. It seems to be going pretty well.
It makes sense, and that way you can build networks and sort of get people referred to you and people out and sort of make sure people get with it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I learned way early in my career that, it's not a good idea to pretend that you're good at something you're not good at. So I'd much rather ask for help. And luckily I've been around long enough to have connections in, high places in a lot of different branches of this industry. So when I'm looking for, information on something like VO2 max, I can go to a guy who's won, I don't know how many triathlons, and, he has the captain of this, national triathlon team and all this stuff, and, he's an expert. So it's much better for me to have an expert doing it than for me to do it myself.
Definitely, yeah. It's sort of always beneficial to hear that, no matter how many times it comes up. It's always good to hear. Something else I became aware of in sort of learning about you from Jason Dolby was you do something called human lifting. What in the world is that?
Well, what happened was one of my partners in the Orange Kettlebell Club is a lady named Nazo, and she's basically the physical opposite of me. She's tiny, she's cute, okay? And she showed me Jeff Martone doing a Turkish get-up holding his wife. And she said,
okay.
Yeah. She said, can you do that? And I said, hell if I know. Right? Let's go on the grass.
Hasn't occurred to me yet, actually.
Right? So, okay, let's go on the grass, right? And I did it. And it was kind of slow going because with the Turkish get-up, I had a lot of trouble transitioning through the split squat with heavy weight over my head. I didn't have the flexibility to maintain proper alignment for me to just pop up, which was frustrating and humbling and everything. And then I just kind of went after it. And then just kind of through an act of laziness, I decided, well, I don't know why I'm doing this Turkish get-up. I'm just going to start jerking people. You know, it's way easier for me. So I started doing that, which I guess kind of culminated in an ITFF certification course where Steve Cotter said, you know, hey, do you want to do me? And I looked at him and I'm like, you know, you're really kind of a jerk, man. I mean, there's like 50 people here, right? And I don't think I can pick you up. So he's like, no, you can do it. And I did. Of course, we both almost died, but we made it, so it's okay.
Sure.
And then, you know, one thing turned into another, and now I don't know how many people I've picked up over my head, but I don't know, maybe 100. You know, like everywhere I go, every time I do a workshop, every time I go to a bar, somebody ends up over my head. You know, so it's not really it's not something that I train with, right? But it's super fun, and I guess the only things I do, I mean, I'll do a press or, you know, a bench press or a Turkish get-up, and I actually pretty sure I can just snatch an abs up. You know? Okay. So that's pretty much it.
It seems like this would be something where it's taking sort of your abilities, sort of what you do really well, and sort of going to the very, you know, sort of the end of the spectrum in terms of, you know, what people might want to do, what they might think is a good idea, but it's sort of challenging and interesting to you at the same time. Does that make sense? I'm sorry.
I don't know if I've ever thought of this as a good idea. You know,
okay, well maybe it's not. Well, I'll tell you what I look at it. What I look at, and I'm not sure is a good idea, is I watch Steve Cotter doing the pistols where he jumps on and off of a table, or he does, you know, sort of loaded, you know, I guess like box jumps with kettlebells in the rack position. I'm like, I'm not sure that's a good idea either. But yeah, people do it. You know what I mean?
It's really a bad idea.
It's interesting and it's motivating and all that kind of stuff. So.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's you know, it's definitely my circus trick, you know.
Sure.
You know, and I guess I've kind of been getting a little more known for it. I actually wrote to Jeff Martone recently, and I told him, it's like, look, man, I want you to know that every time someone sees me do this, I tell them I stole it from you. You know?
There you go.
Straight up stole it from Jeff, right? Who, by the way, has got to be like half my body weight. I mean, there's no way that we're in the same physical realm. You know, I mean, I'm 6'6", I'm about 340 pounds or so.
Wow.
So way more impressive when he does it, you know. But yeah, Steve, you know, he does that thing with the pistols, and you know, he knows how important that was to, you know, getting his name out there, and I'm sure that, you know, he feels that way about me and the way I pick people up. He's really pushing me to get Blackburn over my head. I don't really know because Steve is,
that would be fun.
I mean, Ken is just huge, you know. I mean, I don't know if I could do that, but I've been training really well lately, and my numbers have been going up, my strength has been going up, so who knows, you know, maybe someday.
Yeah, well, I mean, keep pushing it, you know, because it sounds like something has to come next, you know what I mean, and someone has to do something next to keep expanding what people think is possible, you know, and I saw human lifting and I saw Steve Cotter and I was like, I got to hear more about this kind of stuff. This is...
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you one thing, you know, Steve definitely got my confidence up because, you know, the first time I ever tried to do it, I couldn't even pick him up. And then, you know, the second time I tried to get him, you know, was that time he made me do it in Texas in front of all those people. And now, you know, it's just kind of a standard lift. I mean, after my set at the Arnold, I missed it because I was kind of, I don't know, nervous, exhausted, a combination of those things, you know. But, you know, I just don't miss it anymore. I mean, he seems really light to me. And I think the heaviest person I've lifted is about 85 kilo, something like that. But, you know, I've had guys ask me who are just, you know, full-grown men, and it's like, dude, you know, are you kidding? You want me to pick you up on my head with one hand? I'm just a guy, man, you know? Like,
it sort of suspends disbelief. You know, people are not exactly sure. You know, so
totally. Yeah, and now I guess anytime I see something, I just think, you know, well, I could probably pick that up, and you know, like I'll play around with kegs and mopeds and stuff like that, and see if I can just kind of get it up over my head. You know, whatever looks heavy but manageable. You know, I try to grip it and rip it. You know.
Yeah.
But I feel very natural when I lift, you know, kind of strange objects, because the kettlebell is, you know, an asymmetrical object, and getting good at working with it has a lot to do with being able to manipulate not only yourself but the object in space simultaneously. So when I'm picking up something that's very awkward, it feels very natural to me now. And the funny thing is, when I pick up something that's very symmetrical, like a barbell, I feel much more uncomfortable than I do picking up something like a big tire, you know. I'm just not used to it anymore. But, you know, I think that as far as everyday life goes, you know, things are generally asymmetrical, you know. So it's translated very well to my life, you know, especially when I have to move like a television or a chair or something that works.
Right, well, because
pretty well.
At the end of the day, if you spend your life moving things, and that's your profession, and you're strong, and you can't help anyone, you know, move when they need to move across town, you know, what good are you? You know, that's no fun.
Totally.
To be able to do the stuff going up the stairs and everything else. So
yeah, I just don't. I got to tell you, man, I just don't get the other stuff anymore. You know. Like,
yeah.
I don't want to look strong. I want to be strong. You know, right. I don't want to look fit. I want to be fit. You know, and you know, I'm not the kind of guy who's going to sell you a lifestyle, and you know, believe me, you know, I'm nobody's cheerleader. You know, I'm not that kind of dude. You know, like I'm not going to judge you for what you do on your own time. My job is to make you so strong that you can't believe it. You know, and like that's what I do. So, I don't know. I just don't get it. The other stuff just doesn't really interest me anymore. You know, although I do have to admit, sometimes I wish my arms were a little bit bigger again. You know, but
always back to that at a certain.
Yeah, point. You know, I mean, sometimes you're just like, you know, maybe I should just do a few curls. You know, but I can't because it'll hurt my numbers. You know,
sure.
At this point, you know, like my chest is very big because of all the bench pressing, and my arms are very big, you know, from all the curling, and both of those things hurt my lockout when I'm trying to get the kettlebells overhead. And if I can't get to a true lockout, it's going to hurt my numbers. So I guess it's part of the discipline. I have to give that up. But at the same time, you know, my arms have never been stronger, you know, and my body is very linked. So I've never been stronger. I've been segmentally stronger. Like, I'm sure that I don't bench press what I used to bench press. But as far as, like, actual, you know, applied strength, I'm much, much stronger than I used to be, you know.
And isn't that sort of a matter of deciding what you're willing to give up, you know, to be sort of prepared for a specific sport, is to be sort of unbalanced and unable in other areas by definition?
Unbalanced. I don't know if I'd say it's unbalanced.
I mean, to be able to do your lockout means that you might not have, you know, the sort of symmetry and size and other muscles and things like that you might want, but it would be a compromise. It would sort of be impossible to have absolutely both to the level that you might want.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Cotter. I mean, you know, Steve, he's got, you know, huge arms, and like he's just a very muscular guy. He's managed to make it happen, you know. I think that's just kind of his body turning back to the natural order, you know.
Sure.
Mine, the closer I get to my body being what it, I guess, I don't know, it's supposed to be, my personal body, you know, the way it looks changes, for sure. You know, I know, for example, you know, if I don't drink 20 liters of beer in a week, you know, I drop like 30 pounds. I mean, it's ridiculous, you know, when I lift every day.
Sure.
So, like, you know, my my body is fighting to get to, the look that it's supposed to have. And when I resist that, and I do a lot of curls and try to pump myself up, that kind of changes everything, and it ultimately weakens me because I just can't stay healthy. I can't go without getting injured. Usually for me, it's always my bicep tendon. That thing is just a nightmare when I do a lot of chest pressing and a lot of curling, or get all kind of aesthetic driven.
Sure.
But I do sometimes, like, because I'm as insecure as anybody else. So, like, every once in a while I just lose it, and I'm like, oh my God, I want to look better at the beach.
Right. Yeah. There's still always that voice in your head and sort of that desire.
Yeah. But I do have to say, being cool and being good looking aren't the same thing. So, when I think about lifting and being strong, it's like, that part of me that wants to feel good about how I look, I just remind myself, it's like, well, you are who you are, and you just got to be happy with your body, and you just have to be happy with what you're doing. And when I think about it, I really am. I feel like I found what I'm supposed to be doing, and it just fits me really well, and I'm just really happy with everything that goes on physically with me. I mean, I haven't been hurt in so long, I don't remember the last time I was hurt. Of course now I'm going to go get hurt, but you get the idea. I mean, I've been tired, but I just don't get injured anymore. And I was super heavy. I mean, Scott Helsley, this master of sport who lives in Pennsylvania, he builds these custom monster bells. His blog is called Rational Fitness, and it's one of the best blogs for kettlebell lifters ever, And he's building me this custom Orange Kettlebell Club 70 kilogram sport bell. So It's going to be like the same size as the regular sport bells, but it's going to weigh 70 kilos.
Jeez.
Holy cow. I mean, seriously, I've been trying to sleep. I'm so excited, right?
Very nice. I think there's definitely some words of wisdom in that to sort of find, whatever your body is meant to do, and to try to not go so much outside of that.
Sure. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I mean, when I was bench pressing a lot, I mean, the most I ever bench pressed was, I guess, 455, right? And, I was 22. I was about 285 pounds. So, I mean, it's a good bench press, but it's not, an elite bench press. But I was just a guy, who was screwing around with my friends, and, I didn't know anything about technique. I didn't know anything about equipment. Nothing, We were just throwing down, and I was just a big kid. And sometimes I wonder, what I could have done with that if I had gotten into the technical aspects of it the way I've gotten into the technical aspects of kettlebell lifting. But I don't know. I think it just kind of, the timing just worked out.
Sure. Well, it is what it is. You can be content with success, or you can sort of wonder what it might have been. I mean, I think people have that sort of feeling with regret or any kind of action, but ultimately you decide and you move from there. So.
Yeah. Although one cool thing happened, I guess about a year ago. I did bench press for the first time in several years, and it was just 225, but I did it, I think, like 25 times.
Okay.
And I had never done that in my life. Like, I had never been able to do anything more than like 15 times.
Okay.
But I just kind of banged it out because one of the other trainers was doing it, and he was teasing me, and my ego got involved, and what are you going to do?
Sure.
But then I realized, like, this is awesome. I could be like an NFL defensive back.
Right. That's always the thing. It's like when is the combine? It's in sometime in the spring, and everyone wants to bench press to see, if they're stronger than the sophomore 180-pound cornerback, and they're like, absolutely, I am. Like, oh yeah. Oh, but wait, he's like 20, and I'm not. And
Yeah, like he could run all the way to the end zone and then all the way back to where I was before I got 20 yards down the field.
Yeah, it's just a totally sort of different thing. But it's like on that one day, at that one thing, I was better, and you'll always have that. So that's it's fun.
It surprised me, I'll tell you that. I didn't see that coming at all. So
I mean, I've heard sort of various stories. I mean, even going back to Pavel and different people like that saying, we don't really know why kettlebell proves sort of other unrelated attributes like that. But it does.
Oh, it does. It totally does.
Mysterious.
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, it's not a mystery to me. I mean, I could judge something by my own body. Not that I know more than him, but because how could I, right? But I know that for me, it's pretty simple. My body doesn't leak energy anymore, right? So when I lay down on a bench, or if I go to do a push-up or something like that, my entire body is linked up. My glutes are tight, my legs are tight, or rather taut. I just tell people, think palm tree, not oak tree, Okay? So, I'm all ready to go, and when I actually do the lift, my whole body's working, right? And it never used to be like that. It was always just chest and shoulders from the triceps, right? And then the breathing really helps too, because once you learn how to breathe, you learn how to generate force from an entirely different part of your body than you did before you knew how to breathe, right? And it's, obviously, because one of the first things that you do when you start bench pressing is you learn to breathe, right?
Right.
But breathing technique gets more sophisticated the better you get. And then the other thing is just the sequence. Like when you watch real elite level, chest pressers do it, you can see where they start their force. They start in their heels, and it goes straight through their body into their arms, and they're pushing themselves down through the bench instead of pushing the weight off them. Right. And that wasn't a concept that my body got until I started lifting kettlebells. And then I realized, okay, I got to get under this thing, and I got to push myself away. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And then by going through different lifts, you work at different angles, and it makes it easier for your body to get it. Because you can get it conceptually, but if your body's way behind, then, you just don't have it. So for me, those three things kind of working together definitely improved my other lifting, and it really helps because whenever I do workshops or seminars, it's inevitable that I have to do some kind of feat of strength that I don't even know what it is. I've never done it before. I don't know why I'm doing it now, right? But, I pretty much use all the tools that I got from kettlebell lifting to, rack a lat pull-down machine with one hand or something, and small one. It was small. It was like 200 pounds or so. It wasn't like a giant lat pull-down thing.
Okay.
But, in Japan that just happened, and it was like, I can't even believe I'm doing this, but let's try it, and I basically used all the tools that I had from kettlebell and grip training and everything, and then just ripped it, and it worked. So, that's my thought on why it applies. And as far as the way it applies to athletics, that's even easier. If you go to any high school football game and you watch the offensive linemen, you're going to see two kinds of kids, right? I love when people say that. There are two kinds of people. Okay, you're going to see two kinds of kids. There's the knee athlete and the hip athlete. And the hip athlete is the one who's knocking his opponent on his butt. And the knee athlete is the big lumbering heavy kid like I was, right? They stand straight up, they kind of waddle around, they're very slow, okay? The kettlebell changes one into the other. It'll change you from a knee athlete into a hip athlete. As soon as you get the swing, it rewires your body, and that's it. Once you learn how to do that, you will be immediately a much better athlete. If I was running a high school football program, college football program, my kids wouldn't be doing the calisthenics I had to do in high school. They would be doing kettlebells, and the freshmen would have to carry them out to the field every day. For sure. Varsity could just kind of walk, right? But
and that's having talked to, some football strength and conditioning coaches recently, that's a very sort of interesting idea because just the disparity in sort of how to in some sort of easy to grasp as football is just unbelievable, from full Olympic lifts to like power lifters to some schools not at all. You know, and you see, except for the ones that don't lift at all, that just get smashed.
Yeah. I'm a big believer in Olympic lifting for getting strong. If you want to be a powerful person, like really powerful, you got to Olympic lift. I mean, that's it. It's heavy. It's ultra fast, right? You got to do it. And you just, it's the difference between, like I'm talking about that 70-kilo kettlebell. That's like, 160 pounds or so, okay? Your Olympic lifting, we're talking like 300, 400, 500 pounds, okay? I mean, there's huge difference there, right? But as far as, conditioning your athletes to play a sport that requires endurance, kettlebell lifting is very good for that. And for something like football, which positionally requires totally different kinds of endurance all over the place, right? You can really put together a program to condition your athletes, and even more than that, to kind of productively punish your athletes, right? We all know how much our coaches love to make us run, and running is great, but when your offensive linemen have shin splints, they're no good to you, They won't get them if you just make them swing a kettlebell 1,000 times, They'll just get stronger, meaner, learn some new words in Russian. But yeah, and then also when it comes to, athletes like quarterbacks, one of the things that's great about kettlebell is it really works on your joint mobility and your tendon and ligament strength, right? You'll learn to decelerate your arm, right? Because, as we know, when a pitcher throws a fastball, they generally injure their arm on the deceleration, right? Kettlebell training teaches your body to decelerate as well as accelerate, and it strengthens up your tendons and your, it kind of strengthens up your joints to support your ligaments, so very beneficial for quarterbacks and, pitchers and things like that. Yeah, it's like a super tool. It's cool.
That's good advice, because I think sort of in my very limited experience and with throwing athletes, the idea seems to be that these people have sort of enormous sort of imbalances, not only between arms or sides of their body, but just the way that they train and sort of what they're being told, and that what they really need is, like you said, that sort of deceleration and then the ability to be stabilized. To control that whip effect that they're creating.
Exactly. And I don't know, when I work with athletes, I have a pretty strong belief that, you train and you practice and they're different. Because if you're, I just remember my high school days doing 2-a-days, in August, and it's hot, it's 90 degrees, it's 90% humidity, it's hell. You're just getting crushed, right? The idea that someone's going to run you and punish you and condition you and then expect you to learn anything, to me, is kind of crazy. It's like all I'm thinking about is ice. I want some water. I'm going to throw up. I want to go home. To me, you condition somebody and then you teach them stuff, right? But they're separate. So if you're going to condition somebody on a football field, a very good way to do that is to use a kettlebell, because one, it's going to teach you all the things that you would learn doing things like, running through chutes and doing little cone drills and everything, except, you'll be under load, so you'll be getting stronger the whole time, and it'll actually be training your neuromuscular system to fire in the optimal way, right? After that, you practice, you teach, but combining the two, really tough. And I've just learned that from teaching people how to lift kettlebells. It's like, if I'm going to teach you how to snatch a kettlebell, there's so many little technical aspects to that are hard to grasp. If you're exhausted, I've got no shot with you. You're fried. You're not going to do it. So generally what I'll do is, I'll spend time conditioning somebody with the movement that they already have down, like a swing or, whatever elements of the snatch that they have down, we'll work on that. And then, once they're kind of rested a little bit, I'll take time out and just teach them some more technical aspects and then help them practice so that they can get better before they actually use it to train. If that makes any sense.
No, that makes perfect sense. It sounds like a much more sort of sensible approach to sort of building sequentially.
Yeah. I mean, it's worked for me, but, time is always, an element that you have to take into effect too, and I know a lot of coaches have time restraints that make it difficult, but,
Certainly.
I'll tell you right now, 10 minutes of straight snatches and, your cardio is done for the day.
Yeah, that's a good time. That's more than most people want to do, I think.
Yeah, people say it, but I've gotten a lot of resistance on that. I don't want to do 10 minutes, and my reaction is usually, "Why are you afraid?" It's like, it's okay.
Yes.
It's not for you. It's for us tough guys over here. You stay over there. I'll just kind of tease them until they get motivated to do it. And I'm speaking of my clients here, not the general population that I don't know, but this is actually what I would say to somebody if they were in the same room as me. I would just goad them into doing it, and then eventually, once you start working towards something like that, you need to finish it. Like for me, if I miss it, if I can't do it, it drives me absolutely insane. And I don't run. I mean, I hate running. I'm huge. I'm heavy. I look weird. I run like a Tyrannosaurus. Like short arms and those. That's awful. Okay. But I'd imagine that it's something similar to, getting at a certain amount of miles in a day. Running and kettlebell sport are very similar like that. It takes a certain kind of person to want to do it. You have to be a little bit crazy. But once you get good at it and once you really get into it, it's incredibly rewarding, to be able to do it. And coming from me, it's like, I'm a guy who still does all those 1-rep lifts. Side pressing and bent pressing and just silly feats of strength and all that stuff. Like that's in my heart. I probably won't stop doing that until I absolutely have to.
Sure.
But as far as the long training goes, there's nothing better for me than getting good at something that I'm really bad at. And I can tell you, I've been really bad at it for a long time. So it's nice to be getting better finally.
Right. Well, what you put effort into is what improves, and usually the hardest place to put that effort is your weaknesses because you're bad and the progress comes slow and everything like that. So
yeah, it's so easy to do the things that you're good at,
Oh, of course.
You do the work after.
Story of a lifetime right there.
Yeah.
I hate to keep you any longer. I think we're about running out of time, but I wanted to give you a chance to sort of, plug, where you're working, sort of, if people are interested in getting a hold of you, how to contact you, things like that.
Oh, hey, thanks. My club is the Orange Kettlebell Club. We're at orangekettlebellclub.com, and we do workshops and seminars, and, we do them usually on a monthly basis, and we travel all over the place to do it. So if anybody's interested in having a workshop, they can always contact me at John Wild at orangekettlebellclub.com. And the site is filled with links and information, to get people started learning about kettlebells. The kettlebell community is huge on the blog circuit, and there's a lot of information out there. And if you're looking to learn about kettlebell and you're not in Oakland, right, because if you're in Oakland, you better call me. But if you're not, right, my recommendation is to go on the blog scene and read what people write, because, you'll find everything that you're looking for in the way people reveal themselves on the blog. And you'll be able to find a pretty good coach. Also, feel free to email me and ask me, because I know tons of people, and I'm always up for helping people find a good instructor.
Very much appreciate your sort of willingness to spend this much time with us and to be so open and honest. It's very, very beneficial, I think, for our listeners.
Oh, Luke, it's my pleasure, man. Thank you very much for calling.
Yeah, no problem. Take care, and hope to hear from you soon.
Absolutely. You too.